Hi, this is Tropical Plants at 53 degrees north. So following on from another video I've just done on which of my greenhouse plants would do really well as house plants, we're going to have another run through. So this is kind of part two, but it stands alone on its own. So what I'll do is I'll put a card at the end if you want to go and watch part one, but you can watch part two first, it doesn't really matter. And just before we get started, I thought you'd like to see this. This is my orchid Habanera Medusa. I'm very proud of that. That's the first reblooming for me. And I do have a video on growing Habanera Medusa if you want to go and look that one up. But for now, we will get started. And we are in. Okay, so as we look at this staghorn fern here, I thought I'd just very quickly mention that in the first video I did go through several caveats for this. This is just basically a general whiz through some of the genera that I'm growing here in the tropical greenhouse. Many people don't realise is that what I'm essentially creating here is another environment that houseplants can grow in. There are some differences, but for the most part, that's what I'm aiming for. So pretty much all of my plants will grow as houseplants. However, there are a few exceptions, which I'm not going to focus on. I'm looking at the ones that you can grow in the house. So I'll quickly go through some of the genre again today and talk very briefly about their care needs and care requirements, and then hopefully it will at least encourage some people to give them a go. So the first plant we're going to look at is a carnivorous plant, and this is Cephalotus follicularis, an absolutely wondrous plant, a fantastic plant, one of my favourite picture plants. And you only really get the true idea of how gorgeous these are when you see them all season round. At the moment, mine are looking particularly red. A lot of these pictures are old pictures. More so on that one. That was the original plant. That one, it had a repot. It's been knocked back a little bit, but it's due to throw up some nice new growth next year. This one is a little older because it was divided. You can see some newer pictures down there, some greener pictures. But of course, they're getting ready to go into a slight dormant period, not a great deal. And this is what makes them fantastic for houseplants, because I see no reason why these can't grow perfectly well on a windowsill in a little tray of water. What I will say is that in general, although they will cope with even frost and snow for a short period of time, so long as they are not kept like above 20 degrees Celsius for the entire year, and even then it'll probably only weaken them a little bit. The only kind of a dormant period that they like is to go below 20 overnight for like a few months of the year. That will be enough for them to feel like they've gone through a winter dormancy. But for the most part, they'll just keep coming and coming. They look absolutely superb. They're a real incredible plant, and what I like about them is in the wild they grow nowhere else other than a place in Australia called Albany, which is a relatively small area considering, and you can't find them anywhere else growing in the wild. This is why they're called Albany pitcher plants, as well as Cephalotus follicularis. So what's incredible about them is these are a really good example of what's known as convergent evolution. A lot of these pictures will fall off pretty soon, and then we should get some new leaves, and then eventually we get the pictures. Leaves come before the pictures, by the way, so don't get too worried if you get loads and loads of leaves. So back to convergent evolution. So what these have actually done is that they've come up with a very similar solution to that which Nepenthes came up with. In other words, they've created these liquid-filled pitchers which attract insects and other creepy crawly things that come along, crawl in there and fall in and meet their maker, and that provides nutrition for them. So in essence, they've done exactly the same as Nepenthes. They've come up with the same solution. They grow in poor soils, they need nutrition, so they've come up with this design of a pitcher, and it is very similar, even though it's much smaller. And the convergent part is that they have no actual shared ancestry. They've come up with this solution all by themselves, completely separately, even though it looks very similar. I think that's incredible. This is always going to be a talking point, and I have to say that mine at the moment aren't looking their best. As I say, a lot of these pictures are very old. I think the light has also reddened them quite a lot. You can get a few hybrids of these, but in actual fact, honestly, I can't tell the difference. Some of them might be ever so slightly larger, some of them might be ever so slightly different colour, but not enough for me to think I really want that hybrid. So these ones in particular looking really nice, especially the underneath of the lids there. They're looking fantastic, really colourful. It's the newer pictures that look really nice. There's some little teeny tiny ones that are coming. So yeah, This is something that you could grow in the house, along with Drosera, if you want to go and have a go at Drosera as well. Mine, again, aren't looking particularly good because I left them too near the fan and it's dried them out. So that's why I've moved them over here. So that's the first one, Cephalotus follicularis. So we're moving along now to plant number 2, which is the Mandevilla vine. So these beautiful blooms, which on mine carries along all the way along there, and all the way up there into the eaves. I have to say I've not got quite as many blooms as I normally have on them, but bear in mind that these have been in flower probably since about March time, and they've gone right the way through, and I only tend to get like January, February time when they don't have any blooms on and you get the odd yellowing leaf. But for the most part, because they're a highlight plant, they are really happy here in this particular environment, and they grow really, really well for me. Little mention of the name. Dipladenia is a synonym, it's an accepted synonym. It was a genus, it is a now defunct genus, but lots of people still use it. So if you see it labelled as Dipladenia, then you know it's actually a Mandevilla. Don't get confused with the hybrids. There are a number of hybrids, but every species of Mandevilla is a vining plant. The non-vining plants are not species, they're all hybrids. The vining has been bred out of them. They can be used for baskets and as like small shrubby plants or pot plants and so on. So it will be useful to know which one you've actually got. And as I say, very often they're labelled as Dipladenia, even though really they're all Mandevilla. So would it work as a house plant? Well, I would say that if you're going to go for the vining species like mine is Mandevilla synonym Dipladenia sanderi, then you would need like a really big wall for it to climb up. You would need to give it as much light as possible. If you couldn't give it that light, then you would have to buy some grow lights, or maybe one for the enthusiast. As far as temperatures goes, I think it will go down to about 12. Well, in fact, I know it will go down to 12 because I have some cuttings from this in the other side, but it doesn't look its best. It really wants to be above 15 degrees Celsius. Anything below that, and then you're going to get a few more yellow dying leaves throughout the winter months. So if you're going to give this one a go, try and go for one of the hybrids that don't vine quite as much. But for me anyway, I prefer the vining variety for obvious reasons. But I would say, yes, it will work as a house plant, but it's very much like all of these things. It's very much dependent on what you can actually provide and how far you're willing to go. So the next one up is Hippeastrums, and we're looking at nothing other than a pot with a bulb in it at the moment, and I have lots of these dotted around the place. There's a couple more down there that I've just brought into the warmer side and started to water, and there's 4 more under this bench here which I will bring back out of dormancy as the months progress through winter, because I like these to come into bloom successionally, which is one of the great things about Hippeastrum. So back to my original one now. So a few things to say about this. So Hippeastrum are pretty much always sold in the shops as Amaryllis, and I will put some footage of what my Hippeastrums look like when they're in bloom, so you're not just looking at a bulb. So they are incorrectly known as Amaryllis. This is just one of those things that stuck. I believe it was a mistake way back and it's just stuck with people, but they are actually Hippeastrums. But they're great for kids, as you can see, for obvious reasons, because everything about them is large. Great big massive bulb, very, very simple to put them in some multi-purpose compost, some peat-free compost or some coir, and then they will do their thing if you bring them into warmer temperatures. Generally about 18 degrees Celsius plus. After a short time, they'll start to produce leaves, or they might just come straight up with a great big thick stem with a big bloom on the end. Sometimes you can get 4, sometimes you can get 8, I believe. Sometimes you can get a couple of the stems as well. And as you can see from some of my videos in the past, these look absolutely fantastic. Real showstoppers, real head turners, and they couldn't really be easier. But did you know that you can actually keep them year on year? All you need to do is cut off the leaves at the end of the season. What I would tend to do is, once it's finished flowering, if you can leave those leaves as long as possible, just put them somewhere out the way if you can. I tend to cut them off a little bit so that they're not short, but at least they're not like 3 feet long. Cut them down to about a foot. If you're going to be absolutely optimal, leave them alone, but I tend to do that just for space. I leave them as long as possible, and eventually, when it comes around to roughly midsummer, I will stop watering them, let them die down, and eventually I'll cut those leaves off and you're left with this again. And you leave them like that for a couple of months, and then did you know you can actually play around with the dormancy? You can bring them back again whenever you like. So I tend to bring mine back successionally so that I can have like consecutive blooms and they're not all out at once. And of course, as you can see, there's not much space here and they take up a lot of space. So I like them to come into bloom one after the other, which is really, really handy. And they really do offer a fantastic splash of colour. So the only reason I mentioned this one, I know lots of people know about Hippeastrums, is that you can keep them year on year. It's really easy to do. There's no reason why people can't do that. And of course they should, providing that you've fed them and looked after them, get slightly bigger every year, and you should get a better display every year. So why wouldn't you? So next up is orchids. Now orchids is such a massive family that there's so many you could grow in the house. You only have to look down my list of people I subscribe to see how many people grow orchids and how many people actually grow them in the house, whether it's in a conservatory or a grow room somewhere. So you really got the whole world at your feet here when it comes to choice of orchids to grow in the house. Lots of people, of course, grow Phalaenopsis. And I think once you're moving on from Phalaenopsis, you would tend to go for something like a Dendrobium nobile. So moving on from those two popular ones, how about something like this? So this is Oncidium sotoanum. So this is a species orchid and it is very, very fragrant. It's a lovely thing, really attractive, very, very floriferous and lovely to have in the greenhouse. And it's not really that difficult to look after. I've got it in the cool side, so that means it goes down to 12 at night. In actual fact, throughout the winter, it's going to be 12 for most of the winter. Now, these are really known as needing a little bit of a differential between day and night, which is what makes them so suitable for a house. But I would expect if you're going to have it in the house, you need to put it in a room that will get cooler. Otherwise, it might be shy of flowering year on year. And its children, the twinkles are the hybrids, and they will probably be a little bit easier and will probably give you a little more in the way of a guarantee that they will bloom for you. And how about the Phragmipediums? Now, these slipper orchids, for me, this one has actually been in bloom, not this exact same flower, but it's been in bloom for well over 12 months. And that bloom's just about going over, but we've got some more buds coming. And it just keeps coming and coming and coming. It's by far, for me, the easiest orchid I've ever grown. Phalaenopsis are very, very easy, of course, in the house, but in the greenhouse, a little bit more tricky because they do tend to like to be over 18 degrees. And obviously, I'm in a greenhouse. So there's just a few to be getting on with. Of course, there are many, many, many more. Please put in the comments any of your suggestions for orchids that you think grow particularly well in a house. Okay, moving on, we can't ignore the Tradescantias. These are particularly fantastic for in a house, and I think many people I know only ever grow them in a house. And one of the great things about them, you can see there, see those aerial roots there? They're so easy to propagate. They do it anyway, especially if they're in a place with high humidity. So this one is Tradescantia zebrina. This one is the species, and it will do particularly well in a house, providing that you give it loads of light. I think it is known as a shady plant in the wild. However, I don't think that's optimal. I've tried to grow it in the house and I've failed, basically because I don't have enough light. So if you can get it on a windowsill where you know it's going to get that light, then I don't see why you'd have any trouble with it. But if this one is one you already grow, let's have a look at some of the other Tradescantias that you might want to give a try to. So we've got a whole bunch of different Tradescantias here. We've got this quadricolor. I particularly like this one. I've just took some cuttings of this one as it so happens. Quadricolor because it has 4 colours. This one's particularly good because a lot of the Tradescantias revert. This one doesn't. It may well produce green leaves, but even those green leaves can then shoot with some of the 4 coloured leaves. It really doesn't revert back to what it started with. So Tradescantia quadricolor is a great one to go for. I like this one. This is Tiana. This is a lovely one, also known as Callisia gentlei. You've got all these lovely stripes on here. We've got this tiny little one, which I should mention isn't actually a Tradescantia. This one is Callisia rosato. What I've done is I've broadened my Tradescantia growing into the family. So this is a Commelinaceae family, not necessarily a Tradescantia, but it has many of the same characteristics. Another lovely one here, Tradescantia fluminensis, aureovariegata yellow hill. This is another one that will revert, so you've got to keep pinching out those fully green or fully, I never know what colour that is. It's like a creamy or maybe a lime green. I don't know. It's just there's no dark green on it. You need to pinch those out and then you'll carry on getting that lovely coloration on it. Over here we've got Tradescantia Hijau Baru. This is a fairly new one for me. It's going to look much better when it comes around to spring, and I just need to keep pinching those little bits out, those tips, sticking them back in the pot, and it will get bushier and bushier. And one of my favourites here, this is Gibasis. This has a lovely dark, I don't know whether that's burgundy or dark purple. So this is Gibasis Jose Puig, probably pronouncing that incorrectly. It needs bushing out a little bit, so I've got a little bit of work to do with that one yet, but it's beginning to move along quite nicely. Particularly like when you get close up to it, there's like, I don't know if you can see there, there's like a lime green edging to each leaf. Goes really well. I think what you're going to have to do is either get really close up to it or start to really bush it out and get loads and loads of the stems coming down off it, and that will really look its best then. So over here we've got a red jewel, which I have as a hanging pot here. This one is one of my older ones. You can see lots of the dead bits in the middle there. Really neglect this thing, but I think it looks pretty good still. It still gives me those really dark colours. Now I believe this one was treated with some plant growth regulators, but bearing in mind that I've had it over 2 years and it doesn't appear to have reverted into anything like Tradescantia zebrina, I'm still getting these very dark red leaves. Possibly because I've got it in a darker spot in the greenhouse, but again, absolutely fabulous as a house plant. They will go really low, these, in temperature. They can go like even frost. I have heard of people in Greece growing them. I've seen them around the Mediterranean quite commonly. And what happens is, because they grow such big plants, they will die down to like soil level, and then eventually they'll just pop back up again. Now obviously you don't want that to happen in a house, but they'll be totally fine in high temperatures. I kept this at 18 degrees all last winter, and then of course when it got to summer it got higher than that. So give them loads of light if you can. Humidity doesn't matter. I've not found that any of the Tradescantia zebrinas are particularly worried about humidity. Same for all the others really. It's not something that I would expect to be a major issue. They don't need it, providing you're not giving them anything below say 30% humidity or anything above say 85% humidity. For most plants, those extremes are where they start to show some ill effects. Anything in between that, which is what we generally have here in the UK, then they'll be fine. Okay, so the other one I wanted to show you is, well, it was languishing in the back of the greenhouse, filling that space over there, and I completely and utterly neglect it. There's another one here, and it's Tradescantia purpurea. I wonder how many people actually trail it from a hanging basket. I mean, actually trying to get it out of that spot, I've completely destroyed it. And you can see there's not a great deal of it left. However, there are these kind of traily bits down here. Now mine wasn't trailing in actual fact. Mine was, because it was in that side of the greenhouse, so in that corner, it was actually climbing upwards. So if I just take you back here, I'll show you what's fallen off it. These great big pieces down here. Now I know mine doesn't look particularly inspiring at the moment. However, it has done in the past, and you can see the colours perhaps if I kind of zoom in on them. You know, looking through the camera, I really don't think the camera does them justice, and you can see there's a slug trail there. Just been doing a little bit of slug hunting. It's night time at the moment as I film this. So these will all do really well as cuttings, so I might just restart this one, just chop it right back, leave a couple of leaves on and let it start again somewhere. It does have lovely little flowers on it, and they go really nice with these very purple leaves. I've seen this in the Mediterranean usually as like an edging plant, but of course you can do all sorts with it. It's very similar to lots of Tradescantia. You can actually trail it like you can see here, or you can grow it up something, or you can just let it kind of flop and do its own thing. So I would definitely say that is another one that maybe isn't quite grown as much as the Tradescantia zebrina varieties, but it's something that you might want to give a go to. And there is a gorgeous one which is called, I believe it's Pink Stripe, and that's another one that's on my list that I'm going to get hold of because it has a pink stripe. It's purple with a pink stripe. A really nice thing. Now whether that's stable or not, I don't know. We'll have to see. I've not really looked into it too much, but that's another one to give a go to. And I completely forgot to mention that, as you can see, looking at this one, Tradescantia purpurea, don't forget, I hardly ever water it. It's absolutely solid. These are brilliant drought tolerant plants. So if you want a plant in the house that you really don't want to water that much, then Tradescantia purpurea is definitely one to give a try to. As I say, mine's looking absolutely terrible at the moment because I just wrestled it out of the corner, but it was due a prune and it was due a tidy up and probably due a repot as well, looking at the state of this. So that's going to get some attention tomorrow and we'll get that looking great. But it's been like that for well over 2 years, and it's about time it had a little bit of a titivate. Okay, so that's just a few more genera I've gone through there. There's still plenty to look at in the greenhouse that would work as a house plant. So please tell me in the comments if you've grown any of these plants in your house and what your experiences of growing them were. And also tell me in the comments if you want me to keep going. And you can see to my left there, this is another Tradescantia I didn't mention. This one is Tricolor Minima, another great one to have a go at. So that's it for now, and I'll point to a card which is all about growing houseplant cyclamen, which is another fantastic one to give a go to. So for now, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.